All right, good afternoon. As promised, the Secretary General will deliver a statement on the situation in Ukraine. He will not take questions today, and then I will stay here and answer some of your questions. Sir, please, you have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, thank you very much for your presence. The Kremlin has announced that the ceremony will take place tomorrow in Moscow, that will launch a process of annexation of the Ukrainian regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. In this moment of peril, I must underscore my duty as Secretary General to uphold the Charter of the United Nations. The UN Charter is clear. Any annexation of a state territory by another state resulting from the threat or use of force is a violation of the principles of the UN Charter and international law. The United Nations General Assembly is equally clear. In its landmark Friendly Relations Declaration of 24 October 1970, repeatedly cited the stating rules of general international law by the International Court of Justice, the General Assembly declared that the territory of a state shall not be the object of acquisition by another state resulting from the threat or use of force, and that no territorial acquisition resulting from the threat or use of force shall be recognized as legal. And I must be clear, the Russian Federation is one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, shares a particular responsibility to respect the Charter. Any decision to proceed with the annexation of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, regions of Ukraine, would have no legal value and deserves to be condemned. It cannot be reconciled with the international legal framework. It stands against everything the international community is meant to stand for. It flouts the purposes and principles of the United Nations. It is a dangerous escalation. It has no place in the modern world. It must not be accepted. The position of the United Nations is unequivocal. We are fully committed to the sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its international recognized borders in accordance with the relevant UN resolutions. I want to underscore that the so-called referenda in the occupied regions were conducted during active armed conflict in areas under Russian occupation and outside Ukraine's legal and constitutional framework. They cannot be called a genuine expression of the popular will. Any decision by Russia to go forward will further jeopardize the prospects for peace. It will prolong the dramatic impacts on the global economy, especially developing countries, and hinder our ability to deliver life-saving aid across Ukraine and beyond. It is high time to step back from the brink. Now more than ever, we must work together to end this devastating and senseless war and uphold the UN Charter and international law. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Matthew.
All right, what? Sorry?
He wanted us to ask questions.
I'm sure, well, it's the first time you have been kept silent and not expressed your free will. Why don't we do this? Let me take some Ukraine questions, and then we'll go through the announcements. James and then Edie.
Strong words from the Secretary General, but what can the Secretary General or the UN organs do? I mean, the Security Council possibly going to have a vote tomorrow, then a vote in the General Assembly, but it's just going to be more condemnation. Is there anything that can actually be done?
Well, I mean, far from me to speak for the UN organs. They will take the decisions they feel they need to take and through along their procedures. I think this is a reminder for the world of the dangerous situation in which we find ourselves. It is a reminder of the need for every member state to uphold international law. The Secretary General has expressed his concerns to the Russian side and regarding the proceedings around the annexation in a conversation with Ambassador Nebenzia yesterday, and contacts will continue. Edie?
I was going to ask whether the Secretary General had conveyed this to the Russians. Is he planning to convey it perhaps to President Putin himself? And is there any other forum that you think that he could actually make this to? For instance, would he think about, I don't know, possibly making another trip to the region?
Well, I think, he would make another trip to the region if he felt it would achieve something. I mean, I think you've seen since the start of this conflict the practical side of the Secretary General. I think there's a role also for other member states to also speak up in defense of international law. Yes, please.
Thank you, Stéphane. I want to ask a question about the negotiations. So Ukrainian side said it clearly. Now that Russia is annexing occupied territories, negotiations ended. Any possibility is impossible now. In terms of Black Sea Grain Initiative prolongation and other negotiations UN is leading to both sides, as we say, what is the strategy now that Ukraine made it clear negotiations are not possible?
Well, we very much hope that engagement on the issues, especially pertaining to access to food and to fertilizer, will continue. Right? We hope these operations will continue. They are vital for the world. They are vital for the hungry, and they are vital for the hungry today, and they are vital for tomorrow, especially when it comes to fertilizer. So we very much hope that this will continue. Yes, please.
Thank you, Stéphane. I'm Natalia Lutsenko, Ukrainian TV correspondent. Concerning the people that stayed at the occupied territories right now, is there make any sense to send more UN missions to the territory next to this annexed, this occupied regions, just in case to help people to run away from Russia occupation?
Well, I mean, I think you've seen as this conflict has progressed, we've had extremely challenging, if not impossible, task of crossing lines into areas that were not under Ukrainian control. And this has been for quite some time. As territory has changed hands, as some territory has come back under Ukrainian control, we've been able to work with local partners and increase our humanitarian assistance. This is something that our team on the ground is monitoring day by day, and as soon as they either directly or through humanitarian partners have access to a certain territory, they will be there.
Just a short question also. The level of fear in Ukraine about the nuclear weapon explosion that could possibly happen, I mean, we cannot deny that. It's rising in Ukraine, and the measure is very high. So is there any case of emergency, extra plan from the United Nations is probably going to create more migrants that are going to be over?
Well, I mean, I think the UN system in itself is mobilized and has been mobilized since the start of this phase of the conflict to handle any mass movements of people, either from Ukraine's to other countries or even within Ukraine, supporting the government's own efforts. Yep.
Thanks, Steph. Given the Secretary General's strong statements today, to what extent could he or would he support the suspension of Russia from the Security Council?
Look, the removal of any member state from an organ, from the Security Council, or from the UN is clearly laid out in the Charter. It's a member state action. I think the Secretary General, frankly, in the past we've seen some actions, has kind of said that, pushing countries out of a global forum is not really a right step when we're talking about the need for more diplomacy.
Steph, just to follow, beyond condemnation, what's the strongest action that he could take that we haven't seen yet?
Well, the Secretary General's strongest weapon is the microphone, is his bully pulpit. And in parallel are all the conversations he's been having with world leaders on this issue. Because as I said earlier, there's a role for the UN, but there's also a role for other member states to speak out and have a positive impact in terms of ending this conflict. He spoke yesterday also to President Zelensky, and he's had other contacts. Desi, and then Sherwin.
A follow-up with Edie's question. You just said that Secretary General has already conveyed the message to the Russian ambassador in Nebenzia. I just want to know, is there any response from the Russian side?
I think you know how to reach Theodore, and you should ask him. No, I mean, it's not for me to speak for the other side. Sherwin.
Steph, can you talk about what this war has done to the relationship between the United Nations and Russia, between the Secretary General and President Putin in particular?
Well,
People often talk about the role of the Secretary General in forging a peace negotiation here, his good officer's role. But a lot of people don't understand that that is not a possibility. Why?
Well, and let's, if you talk about the United Nations, we need to figure out which United Nations you're speaking about. I can only speak in terms of the relations between the Secretary General, and the Russian Federation. The Secretary General has strongly believed in the need to keep lines of communications open. And that's even more important at the worst of times, right? Especially when you're Secretary General of the UN. And I think he has shown the value of that when he went to Moscow and then went to Kyiv, managed to get the approval of both sides to evacuate civilians out of the Azovstal plant, managed to negotiate with the Russian Federation, with Ukraine, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, working with Russia, the US, and the EU and others on the facilitation of trade. So the Secretary General is expressing his strong position in defense of international law. It does not mean that he will no longer speak to the Russian side. On the contrary, I think the communications will need to continue and continue in a strong manner. Stefano, and then.
Thank you, Stéphane. The Secretary General just mentioned the Friendly Relations Declaration of 24 October 1970 by the International Court of Justice and also the General Assembly Declaration. I think practically is the same that Foreign Minister Lavrov was mentioning during this press conference last Saturday. So it seems that there is a different interpretation of what came out of the General Assembly at that time, and I'm sure you heard what, and also Ambassador Nebenzian then say that again, that practically there was.
No, Stefano,
the question.
What is the question?
The question is, I don't think he says. I don't think that this passage is just a coincidence. I think he's a reply of the Secretary General to Mr. Lavrov. So can you explain us better on what the Secretary General differ of his interpretation of that declaration from the Russians?
I don't know how to say this in English, but I'll say it in French. Je vais pas faire une explication de texte. I'm not here to do an analysis of what others have said, what the Secretary General has said. That compare and contrast, the analysis, Stefano, that's up to you. I think the Secretary General was extremely clear in what he just said. I mean, he wanted to come down and say it himself directly. He didn't want me to do it for him. And so he has a particular message to deliver on the need to protect international law, and as the basis of how this organization works. What others may say, what others may interpret, you have to ask them.
So just very quick. So the Secretary General thinks that Lavrov is wrong when he quotes that.
The Secretary General thinks that he, Antonio Guterres, is right when he speaks. I will let you characterize or interpret the language of others. On Ukraine, or other, okay, let me get to other news, which includes Iraq.
Yes.
Okay. No, but let me go first, and then you can ask questions. We'll go back to the regular format. You saw that last night we did issue a statement expressing the Secretary General's concern at the reported shelling of the Kurdistan region of Iraq, including civilians areas. He calls for an immediate de-escalation, urges respect for Iraq's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and the principle of good neighborly relations. Also, we issued a statement on Guinea, in which the Secretary General took note of the start of the trials related to the crimes committed on September 28, 2009, during an opposition rally in Conakry. He reaffirmed the UN's commitment to support efforts aimed at upholding justice and accountability of these crimes. The Secretary General also called on the authorities to ensure that human rights are respected throughout the country's political transition process. And the mission, the UN Democratic Republic of the Congo, is telling us that yesterday UN peacekeepers responded by deploying to Pampanga village in Ituri's Jugu territory after shots were fired there. Upon reaching the village, peacekeepers and Congolese troops exchanged fire with militants from the armed group known as Codeco, forcing them to withdraw. A second patrol was subsequently dispatched to the area. And I would like you to note that our colleagues at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights presented on behalf of the Secretary General the annual report on reprisals, saying that people in 42 countries faced reprisal or intimidation for cooperating with the UN on human rights. As in previous years, the report shows that intimidation and reprisals disproportionately impact certain populations and groups, including representatives of indigenous peoples, minorities, or those who work on environment and climate issues, as well as people who may suffer discrimination based on age, sexual orientation, or gender. And today is 2 days to mark. Today is World Maritime Day. In his message, the Secretary General notes that the war in Ukraine and the Black Sea Grain Initiative have reminded us of shipping's vital role in feeding the world. The Secretary General points out that this year's theme, New Technologies for Greener Shipping, highlights the need for sustainable shipping solutions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, protect the environment, and align with the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement on climate change. He stressed that the maritime sector must accelerate its voyage to decarbonization. And today is also the International Day of Awareness on Food Loss and Waste Reduction. This year's theme is Stop Food Loss and Waste for the People, for the Planet. In a tweet, the Secretary General noted that food loss and waste accounts for 8 to 10% of total global greenhouse gas emissions, stressing that we can all act to reduce food waste and support impactful climate action. Majid, back to you. And then Miriam.
Thank you, Stéphane. Well, my question is on the statement on Iraq, and for the sake of a question, if you bear with me, I have to read it was two sentences. The first sentence says, Secretary General is following with concern the reported shelling of Kurdistan region of Iraq, including in civilian areas. Kurdistan region in the past few days have been bombed by both Turkey and Iran. Which shelling is he talking about? The one of Turkey or the one by Iran?
We have no mandate nor forensic capacity to identify where shelling is coming from, right? We do know that it's not coming from within Iraq's own borders. Iraq is surrounded by a number of countries. It is vital that all of these countries respect Iraq's territorial integrity.
So, but both Turkey and Iran made official statement that was them. They did the bombing. They say we did it. There is no. I'm not sure which statement. What is this statement about?
It's about the violation of Iraq's sovereignty.
But by who?
by countries bordering Iraq.
Okay, I'm just going to ask about the one of Iran because that was the most dramatic. Okay, like the past 24 hours, more than 100 suicide drones, according to this is the Iranian terminology, and missiles and rockets was raining on Kurdistan region, killing dozens and wounding others, and including toddlers, and it attacked targeted a school. Do you think this two sentences is enough by the Secretary General for such a dramatic escalation by a country without, and they also posted the videos, their Ministry of Defense and the Revolutionary Guard.
Any violation of Iraq's sovereignty is unacceptable, especially when you're seeing the deaths of civilians. This is also something that the SRSG in Iraq, Janine Hennis-Plasschaert has made very clear. Miriam.
Thank you, Steph. So about shelling in Kurdish region in Iraq and also the protests that continue to rage in Iran, it's actually getting bigger. More people are joining. Universities are striking.
In Iran, sorry.
Iran,
yes. Okay.
Yes. Did the Security General get a chance to talk to Islamic Republic of Iran officials to talk about the suppressing and killing people on the street, and also the shelling of Kurdish region in Iraq? Did he get a chance to talk to them, or is he planning to talk to?
Well, he's spoken to in person not too long ago, both to President Raisi, and the discussion of human rights was present, as well as the discussion in the region, and also to the foreign minister just a few days ago. Our message from here and the message from the Human Rights Office in Geneva is expressing very deep concern at the ongoing violence that we've seen, the excessive use of force by security forces, as well as the restrictions impacting mobile communications and access to the web and social media platforms. And our human rights colleagues have also expressed, I think, particular concerns by comments by some leaders that were really vilifying the protesters and the apparent and what is seems seen from here really excessive use of force.
So he's not planning to talk to officials in
Well,
Iran?
I mean, I just said
Because
he
there are a lot of-
he spoke to President. I mean, this has been
But
going
this
on.
is after
but I mean, this has
Raisi
been
went
this
back
has
to
been
Iran.
this has been going on for
Almost 2
14
weeks.
days now,
Yes.
almost.
Yeah.
It was going on while President Raisi was here. It was mentioned in the conversation with President Raisi. And also he had a subsequent conversation with the foreign minister. Discussions and contacts with the Islamic Republic will continue.
Also another question, a lot of people were imprisoned, so many artists are being arrested and nobody knows where they are, no contact whatsoever with families or the social activists. Do you have any reports how many have been killed on the streets in Iran, and also how many have been arrested?
No, I do not have those numbers here. We'll ask our human rights colleagues if they've managed to collect numbers. What is important is that anyone who is being detained be afforded due process, and then anyone who's been arbitrarily arrested be released. Okay, James.
If I can. So, Security Council, it's not scheduled yet, I don't think, but looks likely to vote tomorrow on the vote about what the Secretary General was talking about today, the annexation and the referenda. Assuming there is that meeting, who will brief? Will the Secretary General brief himself?
No, the Secretary General is not expected to brief. I'm waiting to hear. We're still trying to figure out who will brief from the Secretariat.
Okay. We talked about Afghanistan yesterday and that Afghanistan Trust Fund. Who is liaising with the Trust Fund from the UN? Has any money been made available to the UN for its work?
I'm not aware of any money having been made available. That is something our humanitarian colleagues are in the lead in. But I will check
So
if
it's
there's been.
OCHA dealing directly with the Trust
That's my
Fund in
understanding.
Geneva. And has the UN put its requests for what it wants?
I will ask.
Okay, so a couple of, you're not going to like these, but a couple of leftover ones from Unger that just occurred to me. One, it was lovely to have the canteen open again upstairs. Where is...
On the fourth, the ground floor, you
Yeah,
mean?
I mean,
Yeah, I
where
agree.
is the discussions with the city on the library building, the canteen, the slip road off the FDR? Because, you know, it's blighting part of the building, and it's been like that for years. It's like no one really, oh, who cares? You know. But
Well, I mean, I think I care. I like the cafeteria. You care. So at least that's two people who care.
Yeah.
3, 4. Yeah, exactly. We can.
But are there active discussions
No,
going on with the city?
This has been an ongoing issue with the host country. It obviously involves money and the host country, whether the city level, state or federal, that would have to pay. So I will check if there's any movement on that. But it was, as you said, the cafeteria was open because the drive was closed.
As it perhaps always should be. In terms of one other thing that I noticed, I'm sorry, this is an observation of mine, but I think it's pretty clear.
We've moved to the informal part of this briefing.
No. Security officers in this building are now wearing black body armour in all duty stations. They weren't before. Mm-hmm. Is there a more serious threat in this building? I understand perhaps why they wear body armour on the entrances and the outside, but within the building they're wearing black body armour all the time, a sort of paramilitarisation of their dress code. It's supposed to be a place of peace, not a war zone. No, and I've heard diplomats also remark on this. Okay. I mean, what is the operational reason to do that? And does it not affect the atmosphere of this building when people are all dressed in body armour? And is it really necessary?
Okay. I take your comments under advisement and we'll revert back. All right, anybody else has any sartorial comments? Food?
I have a
No?
question on Stéphane.
Sorry, yes, please. Food or clothes? Go ahead, Oscar.
Yes, Stéphane. My question is in Ukraine, Stéphane. The ONGA just finished, and most of the countries, they condemn the war in Ukraine. And now the strong statement by the Secretary General on these actions or condemnations of violation of human rights and all these even war crimes during the war. So in all these regards and everything that we've seen that President Putin is capable to do anything he wants. Does the Secretary General believe that the UN can stop the war in Ukraine to prevent?
Oscar, I think, listen, it's a very interesting discussion to have around a coffee table. I think I would urge you to look back from the Secretary General's first comments in the Security Council when the war broke out, the comments he made outside of the Security Council when the war broke out, the comments he made in Moscow and Kyiv and all the places he's seen. And I think you have his position. Yes, ma'am.
I have a short one. Has he previously called occupation an occupation, or it's the first time he says this word? Because I can't remember that he previously used
I think
this kind of
in
rhetoric.
my analysis, this is probably the strongest language he's used on the current situation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
In those regards, Stéphane, I'm sorry, and just to follow up what my colleague asked, is this can considered as a colonialism according to how a other country use of force against
Oscar, I think what the Secretary General considers the situation to be is clearly laid out in what he just said. I will leave the other interpretations to you and your colleagues, and I will leave the podium to Paulina.